Hi, my name is Vanessa, and I'm 34 years old. Just 1 year ago, I was at the peak of my career as a senior financial consultant working for one of the most reputable firms in Manhattan. I had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, managing portfolios worth millions, and earning the respect of my peers and clients alike. My life was structured, stable, and full of purpose. I lived in a beautiful brownstone valued at $3.5 million, inherited a family vineyard in Napa, and had carefully built a legacy from scratch. I thought I had it all: a thriving career, financial security, and a marriage that looked perfect from the outside. My husband Eric and I had been married for nearly a decade. He worked in commercial real estate and often joked about how we were the city's power couple. But all of that changed in a single moment, one rainy evening that rerouted the course of my entire life. It had been a long and demanding Monday. I'd just wrapped up a boardroom presentation that had taken weeks to prepare. I was exhausted, running only on black coffee and adrenaline. As I left the office and got into my car, the city streets glistened with rain, headlights bouncing off the slick pavement. I remember gripping the steering wheel tightly, focusing on the rhythm of the windshield wipers, eager to get home and unwind. But just 2 blocks from the West Side Highway, everything turned to chaos. A massive delivery truck barreled through a red light. I saw it only a split second before the impact. The sound was deafening, metal against metal, glass shattering, tires screeching, and then nothing. Darkness swallowed me whole. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed, surrounded by machines, the beeping of monitors the only thing grounding me to reality. I couldn't move. Not my arms, not my legs. I couldn't speak. Panic surged through me, but it had nowhere to go. My body had become a cage. Doctors told me I had suffered a severe spinal cord injury. I was paralyzed from the neck down. They said I would likely never move again, never speak, never do anything without assistance. It was as if my life had been reduced to a pair of blinking eyes and the occasional twitch of my neck. They transferred me to St. Agnes Hospital in Brooklyn, a place I had never imagined I'd end up. It was cold, sterile, and full of silence. Nurses came and went, adjusting tubes, checking vitals, whispering softly around me like I was already gone. Days turned into weeks, and I became a fixture in that bed, motionless, voiceless, forgotten. What hurt most wasn't just the loss of my independence or career. It was the absence of the one person I believed would stand by me through anything. Eric hadn't come. Not once. Not even a phone call. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was overwhelmed. Maybe he didn't know how to handle this. Maybe he was preparing things at home for my return. But deep inside, beneath the pain and the drugs and the fear, something told me the truth was much darker. As I stared at the ceiling night after night, the one question that echoed in my head wasn't, "Will I walk again?" It was, "Where is he?" And I would soon learn that the man I thought I knew, the man I trusted with my heart and my future, was about to break me more than any accident ever could. The day Eric finally walked into my hospital room, I thought my heart might explode with relief. I heard his footsteps approaching long before I saw him. They were measured and confident, the kind of walk I had memorized from years of loving him. When he stepped inside, he looked exactly the same: polished suit, neatly styled hair, that same expensive cologne he always wore. But something was wrong. I couldn't explain it at first. His eyes scanned the room like he was inspecting a property, not visiting his wife. His smile was hollow, his expression unreadable. He stood at my bedside, staring down at the tubes, the machines, and then at me, this broken, paralyzed version of the woman he once called his wife. He didn't say, "I missed you." He didn't even ask if I was okay. Instead, he leaned in and whispered, "Don't worry, Vanessa. All your property is mine now anyway. You're going to die." I blinked, not once but several times, trying to convince myself that I had imagined it. Maybe the medications were distorting my perception. Maybe I was hallucinating. But no. Eric's eyes were cold and calm. He looked almost amused. My body couldn't move, couldn't react. I couldn't cry out. I was trapped, a prisoner inside my own skin, while the man I had loved for 10 years stood over me like a vulture. Then came the documents. He pulled them from his briefcase, stacks of paperwork that I recognized vaguely. Property deeds, account access, legal transfer forms. He positioned the documents against my limp hand, one after the other, pressing my unresponsive fingers onto each page, leaving my fingerprints in place of a signature. His hands moved efficiently, like he had done it before, like he had practiced. Then, with the same calm demeanor, he signed his own name on each form, pretending to be me. It wasn't just betrayal, it was theft, premeditated and heartless. He took everything. My $3.5 million brownstone, my savings, my family's vineyard, the investments I had carefully built over a decade, and even my jewelry and my father's art collection. He leaned in one last time, his face inches from mine. "Now you can die peacefully," he whispered, as if he were soothing a child. "Your property is mine now. Don't worry, my dear wife." And just like that, he walked out, leaving the faint scent of cologne and the stench of betrayal hanging in the air. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to fight. But I couldn't. I was nothing more than a silent witness to my own erasure. The door closed behind him, and the room fell quiet again, except for the beeping machines and my quiet, paralyzed breath. That night, I cried in silence. Tears streamed down my face, but no one noticed. No one knew. Eric had stolen everything, not just my assets, but my dignity, my safety, my belief in love. And still, no one knew what had happened. I was locked in a body that couldn't defend itself, and the man who should have protected me had used my weakness against me. I lay there in that bed with nothing left but my thoughts, crushed beneath the weight of betrayal. In that moment, I thought the worst had already happened. But I didn't realize then, my battle was only beginning. The person I had once been was gone. But something deeper inside me, something I didn't know was still alive, had started to stir. It wasn't strength, not yet. But it was the first flicker of survival. The days that followed Eric's betrayal blurred into one long stretch of emptiness. I no longer counted time by the rising and setting sun, but by the sounds of nurses changing shifts, the rhythmic beeping of monitors, and the quiet shuffle of feet outside my door. I lay there motionless, drifting between consciousness and despair. The pain from the accident had dulled, but something deeper and sharper had taken its place, the ache of helplessness. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't tell anyone what he had done to me. And worse, no one suspected a thing. The world around me carried on as if nothing had changed, while mine had crumbled into dust. Nurses came and went, their voices gentle, their hands soft. One of them, Mia, stood out. She was young, probably in her 20s, with kind eyes and a natural warmth that filled the room every time she entered. She would hum quietly while checking my IVs or brushing my hair. Sometimes, she read to me from the news or told me stories about her college life, not realizing how those small moments kept me tethered to reality. But even Mia, with all her compassion, had no idea that behind my unblinking gaze was a woman screaming for help. At night, I stared at the ceiling, my mind drifting through memories of better times. I remembered the smell of my brownstone's wood floors, the late-night dinners with Eric before he became someone else, the vineyard where I spent childhood summers with my grandfather. Now all of it was gone, taken from me not by fate, but by the one person who vowed to protect me. I imagined Eric in Miami, laughing in luxury, using my money to sip champagne in rooftop bars with people who didn't even know my name. And here I was, alone in a hospital bed, reduced to a silent body and a mind full of heartbreak. There were nights when I wished I wouldn't wake up, when I prayed, not for healing, but for the machines to stop. I didn't want to spend another day trapped inside this unresponsive body, reliving every moment of betrayal. But somehow, even in the darkness, some small, cruel force kept me alive. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was grief. Or maybe it was the tiniest, most fragile piece of hope that refused to die. I began to imagine what I would say if I could speak. How I would tell someone, anyone, the truth. How I would expose Eric for the monster he had become. How I would scream his name in a courtroom and watch him squirm. These were fantasies, distant and impossible, but they gave me something to cling to. My world had collapsed, yes. But deep within that collapse, I started to imagine rising again. Not as the same woman, but as someone stronger, someone unbreakable. I didn't know how, and I didn't know when, but I knew I couldn't stay silent forever. Something had to change. And as it turned out, change was already on its way, walking down the hospital corridor, about to open my door and alter the course of my life once again. I was staring at the ceiling, lost in the fog of my thoughts, when I heard slow, uncertain footsteps outside my room. They were different from the hurried pace of nurses or the heavy walk of doctors. There was a pause, then a gentle knock on the door. For a moment, I thought it might be Mia again, or maybe just another routine check. But when the door opened and the man stepped inside, my heart reacted before my mind could even process what I was seeing. It was Marcus. Marcus, my childhood best friend, the boy I raced bicycles with down the hilly streets of Boston, the one I used to call at midnight just to talk about nothing, the one who always knew when something was wrong. He looked older, his hair touched with gray, a tiredness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. But his smile, the way he looked at me, it brought a flood of comfort I hadn't felt in months. He walked toward my bed, his expression shifting as he took in the sight of me, the tubes, the wires, the pale skin, and the body that refused to move. He knelt beside me, reached for my hand, and whispered, "Vanessa, I'm so sorry." Tears welled up in my eyes. I wanted to cry out, to tell him everything, to tell him how much it meant that he was here, how shattered I was, how Eric had destroyed me. But no sound came. Only tears sliding silently down my cheeks. Marcus didn't let go of my hand. He stayed there, holding me, his other hand resting gently on mine as if anchoring me to the world. He came back the next day, and the day after that. He read to me, told me about his life in London, about the cases he was working on, about his sister's new twins. He brought me flowers, played music we used to love, and sometimes just sat quietly beside me. When he thought I was asleep, he'd whisper things like, "I wish I'd been here sooner," or, "You're still the strongest person I know." With each visit, the fog around me began to lift. I started to feel present again, seen, valued, human. Then one morning, as he sat beside me with his usual cup of coffee and hopeful smile, something stirred in my right hand. A tiny flicker. I focused every ounce of energy on it, willing my finger to move. Sweat broke across my forehead from the effort. And then it happened. My index finger twitched. Marcus froze, his eyes wide. "Did you just?" he asked, then jumped into action. He pulled a pen and notepad from his bag and gently placed them in my hand. "Try," he whispered. "Just try." It took everything I had, but slowly, painfully, I dragged the pen across the paper, forming trembling, barely readable words. "Eric stole everything. Help me." Marcus stared at the message, his face draining of color. For a moment he didn't speak. Then I saw something ignite in his expression, fury, determination, purpose. He looked back at me, voice steady. "Don't worry, Vanessa. I know exactly what to do. You'll get everything back." He leaned in close, pressing his forehead to mine. "I'm with you. You're not alone." In that moment, something shifted inside me. For the first time since the accident, I felt the faint flicker of power, of control. I was no longer just a victim lying in a hospital bed. I was a woman with truth on her side, and someone willing to fight for it. And I would not be silent any longer. From the moment Marcus read my trembling message, everything changed. He wasn't just my childhood friend anymore. He became a force, an advocate, a man on a mission. The very next morning, he arrived at the hospital not just with coffee and books, but with questions. He asked for copies of my medical records, legal files, and visitor logs. He started making phone calls, sharp, firm conversations that made the hospital staff take notice. I watched as he moved with focus, his mind already building a case, laying the groundwork for something I never believed was possible: justice. Marcus moved into my brownstone on the Upper West Side. The home that Eric had taken for himself now became Marcus's base of operations. He went room by room, documenting what remained and what had vanished. My grandfather's oil paintings were gone. A few investment folders had been emptied from the safe. It was clear Eric had started erasing me before my accident had even fully settled into public memory. But Marcus was smart, and he wasn't doing this alone. He reached out to a private investigator he knew, Madison, a sharp, no-nonsense woman from Chicago with a reputation for tracking people who didn't want to be found. She had icy eyes and a calm voice that made people underestimate her. But behind that calm was someone with a gift for exposing secrets. Madison began tracking Eric. He was in Miami, living large off my money. 5-star restaurants, private poker nights, yachts, new girlfriends. He had wasted no time stepping into his new life, one that I had built and he had stolen. Madison managed to befriend the building manager of Eric's luxury penthouse and, using a well-placed maintenance call, planted tiny surveillance devices inside. Cameras disguised as smoke detectors. Microphones built into air fresheners. It was risky, but it worked. As Marcus kept me updated each evening, speaking in low tones next to my bed so no one would overhear, I could see the lines of fatigue etched into his face. He was pouring himself into this with everything he had. "He'll slip," he told me one night. "Men like him always do. He thinks he's won, so he'll get cocky. And we'll be ready." Days passed. I watched the phone constantly. I imagined Eric bragging about me to strangers over glasses of expensive bourbon. I imagined his smug grin, his careless laugh. I imagined the words I hoped he would say, the ones that could bring it all down. And then one night they came. It was nearly midnight when Madison sent Marcus the first batch of audio files. I saw his face turn pale as he listened, sitting in the dim hospital light beside me. He didn't say anything at first, just clenched his jaw, eyes narrowed. Then he turned the phone toward me, placed an earbud gently in my ear, and hit play. Eric's voice crackled through the recording, familiar yet disgusting. He was laughing, the background filled with music and the sound of poker chips. Then came the words. Clear. Cold. Brutal. She couldn't even move. I took her fingerprints and forged her signature. Now the brownstone, the stocks, even her family's vineyard in Napa are mine. She'll be dead in a year anyway. The doctors said so. I felt the blood drain from my face. My heart pounded so hard it echoed in my ears. The proof was real, undeniable. I had imagined justice. But now it was within reach. Marcus's voice was quiet, but burning with resolve. "This is it," he said. "We take this to the world." The next morning, he contacted Lily Stone, a respected journalist he knew from his time working legal reform in London. Within 24 hours, Vanessa's story was everywhere. Respected financial consultant betrayed by husband. Abuse, fraud, and a fight for justice. My face, once shown beside finance columns and market predictions, was now front-page news, paired with words like victim, survivor, and fighter. Social media lit up. Support poured in. Eric's world began to collapse faster than I could have dreamed. His social accounts vanished. His business contacts cut ties. His name became poison. I couldn't speak, but I could feel it. My voice had returned through the world around me. And the man who thought I would stay silent forever was about to face consequences louder than anything he'd ever imagined. The days that followed were a whirlwind of movement, strategy, and fire. Marcus assembled a powerhouse legal team made up of former colleagues, financial fraud experts, and a paralegal named Julia, who had the sharpest mind I'd ever witnessed in action. She spoke with calm authority and tackled the mountain of forged documents Eric had used to strip me of my life's work. Madison supplied surveillance records, video stills, and financial trail breakdowns. Everything Eric thought he'd buried was now laid bare, organized and weaponized. While the legal team filed criminal charges, fraud, financial abuse, identity theft, and perjury, Marcus filed a separate motion, divorce. He wanted it done right, by the book, through the family court system. No shortcuts. No quiet settlements. A legal severing of ties. The same week we submitted the fraud case to the district attorney's office, Marcus filed the divorce papers in Manhattan family court. I couldn't walk into the courtroom yet, but my presence was there, on every page, in every signature, in every piece of evidence they carried on my behalf. We weren't just asking for justice anymore. We were demanding it. Finally, the day arrived. The courtroom in Lower Manhattan buzzed with journalists, onlookers, and people who had flown across the country to show support. Some were veterans of the financial world who had worked with me. Some were strangers who had simply read my story and wanted to see truth win. Marcus wheeled me into the room with quiet dignity. I wore a soft blue blouse, my hair gently brushed, a light touch of lip balm. For once, I felt like a person again, not a patient, not a victim. Eric sat at the defense table, pale and twitchy. Gone was the polished man in the penthouse. His eyes scanned the crowd, nervous. When they landed on me, they stayed only for a second, then dropped. He knew. The trial was brutal and swift. Marcus read my victim impact statement aloud with such controlled emotion that the room fell silent, even the judge. "This is not just about money," he said. "This is about betrayal, about using a woman's silence as a weapon against her. But she is not silent anymore." The evidence was overwhelming. Forensic handwriting analysis, financial logs, surveillance audio, fingerprint timestamps. The court watched as everything Eric had done was unraveled before their eyes. His lawyers tried to discredit the recordings, question my mental capacity, delay the proceedings, but Julia was relentless. She dismantled every argument with facts that cut like glass. After hours of testimony and evidence, Judge Harper leaned forward and read the verdict. Eric was found guilty on all counts. The judge's words were clear and sharp: 10 years in federal prison, no parole. Full restitution of assets to Vanessa, my home, my vineyard, my investment accounts, the artwork that had been intercepted at auction, all of it returned. The divorce was finalized immediately after the criminal sentencing. I was not just free financially. I was free personally, no longer tied by law or a name to the man who had tried to erase me. As Eric was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, he looked back for just a second. But I didn't feel victory. I felt relief, deep, soul-level relief. I had imagined this moment so many times, thought I'd feel anger or triumph. But what I felt was peace. A burden lifted. A nightmare ending. The truth was finally acknowledged, not just by the law, but by the world. Outside the courthouse, Marcus stood beside me as reporters shouted questions. He placed a hand on my shoulder and said firmly, "Vanessa won't be taking questions today." Then he helped me into the waiting car, shielding me from cameras. As we drove through the streets of Manhattan, I stared out the window. Everything looked different. Not because the city had changed, but because I had. Returning to my brownstone was like stepping into a dream I never thought I'd see again. For so many months, it had belonged to someone else, a trophy claimed by a man who had used my stillness as a weapon. But now, as Marcus wheeled me up the familiar steps and unlocked the front door, it felt like the house itself breathed with relief. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, dust dancing in the air like memories stirred back to life. Everything was where it had once been, rearranged with care, restored piece by piece. And on the mantel in the living room, Marcus had placed the photo of my father. The same one Eric had packed away, as if it meant nothing. Now, it stood like a guardian watching over me. The first few days were overwhelming. There was a strange ache in returning to a place filled with so much history, some beautiful, some painful. But this time, I wasn't alone. Marcus stayed. He didn't hover or pity me. He just existed beside me. He made coffee in the mornings, sat beside me during my rehab sessions, read to me at night when I couldn't sleep. He joked with the nurses, kept a notebook of all my small victories. When I whispered my first word during a speech therapy session, just one shaky syllable, he beamed like I had won a marathon. Recovery was slow, often grueling. My body had been still for too long. Every twitch, every movement, every whisper felt like a battlefield. There were days I cried in frustration when my fingers wouldn't grip, when I couldn't even feed myself, when the memories of betrayal clouded everything. But Marcus never let me fall into darkness. He reminded me gently that healing wasn't a straight line, and that strength wasn't measured in steps, but in persistence. The hospital staff who visited for in-home therapy became like family. Mia, the young nurse who had once read me headlines while I was trapped in silence, visited often. She cried the first time she saw me sit upright without full support. My living room slowly transformed into a space of recovery and resilience. Exercise bands on the walls, speech cards on the coffee table, notes and flowers from strangers who had read my story. But it wasn't just my body that began to recover. Something deeper stirred inside me, the part of me that had been buried under shame and silence. I began journaling, first in scattered sentences, then full pages. I wrote about what had happened, not to relive it, but to claim it, to make it mine. Marcus encouraged me to speak out, to use my voice not just for myself, but for others. And slowly, the idea took hold. What if I wasn't the only one? What if others were trapped, voiceless, silenced by financial abuse or medical vulnerability? With Marcus's help, I began reaching out. Through interviews, letters, and later public talks, I shared my story. I told the world about the woman who had once been paralyzed and silent, and who now fought with every word. We started a foundation together, one that would provide legal aid and support to victims of financial exploitation, particularly those with disabilities. And through it all, Marcus remained by my side. He never asked for anything in return. He never made promises or pushed boundaries. But in the quiet moments, when he tucked a blanket around me or gently rested his hand over mine, I saw it. The unspoken bond between us, something deeper than words. Something built not on romance, but on loyalty, trust, and shared survival. There were still hard days. I still had scars, some visible, some not. But I was no longer defined by what had been done to me. I was reclaiming my name, my life, my strength. And for the first time in a long time, I looked at myself in the mirror and saw not a broken woman, but one who had endured, who had risen. Spring arrived in New York with a softness I hadn't felt in years. The cherry blossoms along the sidewalks near my brownstone bloomed like pink confetti, the breeze carrying the scent of fresh beginnings through my windows. I would often sit by the glass in the mornings, a warm blanket over my legs, watching the world move outside. People rushing to work, children laughing on scooters, delivery men balancing too many boxes. Life, ordinary and beautiful. For so long, I'd felt as though the world had moved on without me, but now I was part of it again. Each day brought a new step forward, no matter how small. I could now feed myself with a little effort, type slowly on a tablet, and whisper full sentences. My speech was soft, sometimes shaky, but it was mine. I began writing again, not just in journals, but in articles and interviews. With Marcus's help, I published an op-ed in a national newspaper about the silent epidemic of financial abuse against vulnerable individuals. The response was overwhelming. Letters poured in. Survivors, families, nurses, advocates, people who had experienced their own versions of silence and injustice. My voice had become a lifeline for others and for myself. The foundation Marcus and I launched grew faster than we had imagined. We partnered with legal firms, medical institutions, and advocacy groups. We provided emergency financial counseling, legal support, and educational workshops. What began as a small act of healing became a movement. And in every boardroom I entered, every panel I joined, even if I arrived in a wheelchair with slow speech, I felt powerful. Not because I had returned to the woman I was, but because I had become someone stronger. As the months passed, my bond with Marcus deepened. He never asked for anything more than I could give. He respected every boundary, celebrated every victory, and weathered every setback beside me. Some nights, we sat in the quiet of my living room, jazz music humming in the background, and said nothing at all. And still I felt understood, protected, cherished. It wasn't the love story I had imagined for myself all those years ago. But maybe it was something better. A love rooted in respect, in fire-tested loyalty, in truth. I still carried the weight of what Eric had done. Some wounds heal, but they leave a shape behind, a shadow, a memory. But I had learned that being broken wasn't the end. It was an invitation.
To rise.
To rebuild. To reclaim. One evening, as I sat by the window, watching the lights stretch across the city skyline, I whispered aloud, "I'm not finished." Marcus turned from the bookshelf and smiled. "I know," he said. "You're just getting started." And he was right. I am Vanessa. I am a survivor. I am a fighter. I am a woman who lost everything and still stood up again.
This is not the end of my story.
It's only the beginning. If this story inspired you, please like the video, leave a comment to share your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful real-life journeys. Your support helps bring untold stories to light and gives strength to those who need it most.